I couldn't think of a better way to start our summit than with the keynote that Rock has planned for us. He goes by Rock. His name is hard for some people to pronounce, but he likes to go by Rock. And he's a seasoned security leader. He's a CEO. He's an advisory board member. And he's the author of a book that comes out January 26th. And the title is The CISO Evolution: Business Knowledge for Cybersecurity Executives. And this book gives practical guidance on ways to illustrative ways to effectively deliver aligned cybersecurity outcomes. Rock, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jarek, and good morning, everyone. Give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me okay. We're going to take that as a yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Jarek, Frank, and Sands for asking me to be here this morning. So as Jarek mentioned, I'm going to be talking about translating cyber risk into business risk, and what are the things that you need to be aware of and think about, and hopefully some practical how-tos of doing so. So a little bit about me. Sorry if you were expecting that other Rock. Frankly, though, if I would have trademarked my name in high school, I probably wouldn't be here today. My name is Kyriakos Lambros, but I do go by Rock. I've been in this industry for over 20 years. I like to joke that when I started, I had hair down on my shoulders and no gray, and look at what it's done to me. I've been in various different industry verticals throughout my career, from government to e-commerce and just about everything in between. As Jarek so kindly mentioned, I did co-author a book. It was my COVID project with a friend of mine, Matthew Sharp, The CISO Evolution, Business Knowledge for Cybersecurity Executives. It is being released in January of next year. And, as part of that, hopefully leading into RSA. And, that's going to be a kind of a great coming out party for all of us to get back together again physically. And then I am the founder of Rock Cyber. And I founded Rock Cyber back in 2018 because, I still think we have a massive problem in cybersecurity. We're in now the third decade of the 2000s, and we still largely kind of suck at the proverbial partnering with a business. Tactically, cybersecurity is still seen as the department of no. And strategically, we still bore company leadership to death with metrics like, well, how many attacks did the firewall block this quarter? Or how many critical high, low, and medium vulnerabilities are on the network month over month. While these metrics might be great operationally, they do little to garner support across the organization. Most of all, they fail to garner trust that you can see above the trees and be the cybersecurity leader that your organization needs. I belong to the National Association of Corporate Directors, or the NACD. According to the NACD, less than half of the organizations believe their board and executive management have a sufficient understanding of cybersecurity to evaluate security controls fully. When public company directors were asked to evaluate the quality of information that they get from senior management, the quality of the information provided by cybersecurity is rated the lowest. And that's kind of startling to me. Meanwhile, over 65% of CISOs now report to their boards at least 2 to 4 times a year, and their audience is increasingly the full board rather than a separate subcommittee like the audit committee or risk, or even the gov and nom committee. This problem does not only affect public organizations, it affects private organizations even more. At the same time, as cybersecurity leaders, we struggle to fight a constantly changing technology and threat landscape with limited budgets and resources. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. Even if budget and resources weren't limited, we still couldn't secure all the things. So where do we start? First, we have to change the notion that we're merely technology leaders. Even if budget and resources weren't limited, again, we still couldn't secure all the things all the time. So really, I'm sorry, the question is really, how do we optimally allocate resources? Cybersecurity leaders have to be business leaders. They have to be the leaders that people want to turn to help solve problems and enable strategy, and not be the group that is only there to get in the way or to check some compliance checkbox. In the cyber physical world, where operational technologies or IoT are involved, cybersecurity can very often equate to safety. So ensuring your cybersecurity programs have the support, trust, and resources they need becomes even more critical. Sorry, there's a little delay here on the clicking. We need a paradigm shift. There's a lot of great guidance out there about the proverbial connecting with the business that we hear about all the time. All of these organizations and frameworks, such as the Digital Directors Network, the NACD, the Private Directors Network, and Equilar, they all provide a ton of resources for cybersecurity leaders to do so, to connect with the business. And they also provide guidance for executive leadership and corporate directors to better evaluate cybersecurity risks. However, as great as all of these are, and I truly encourage you all to go out and check out these resources, they're all missing one fundamental component. They all have an underlying assumption that you have fundamental business acumen. So a little bit of story time. My parents are Greek immigrants who came to the United States in the 1970s. They raised my sister and I speaking Greek in our home. I love being bilingual. I mean, it's obviously served me very well, from obviously communicating with my parents and family abroad to giving me an advantage even in the application and recruiting process of various roles throughout my career. Interestingly, though, for as long as I've been doing this, I never needed to use Greek in a professional setting until March of last year, literally right before the world came crumbling to an end. My father had a good grasp of English, as he was the primary breadwinner for our family, and he used English every day. My mother, however, was a stay-at-home mom for most of my youth. As a result, she only picked up enough English to understand most of a conversation, but not enough to speak fluently and effectively. Ironically, as an aside, my mother's English was never better than during the O.J. Simpson murder trial, when she was glued to the TV all day, every day. But shortly after that trial ended, one satellite TV provider started offering a bundle of Greek channels. My parents subscribed, and my mother's English fell off a cliff, never to return. On the flip side, however, since I moved away from the city where my parents lived, my Greek has gone downhill because I only use it when I speak to my mother. Today, more than 20 years later, my mother and I communicate through a mixed mask conversation of what I call Gringlish, and I'm the first to tell you it's not anywhere near effective. And it's unfortunate that as a result, our conversations are usually short and there's not a lot of depth. However, I recognize that it's my responsibility to bridge the communications gap. My mother is not bilingual. I am. Just as cybersecurity leader, it is my responsibility to learn to speak that language of the business instead of business learning to speak the language of cybersecurity. So in my opinion, business acumen can be broken down into three pillars: foundational business knowledge, communication and education, and leadership. I'm going to touch a little bit on each of these, but we clearly can't go into depth in all of them today. There are entire master's programs dedicated to developing business leaders. But I'm here to tell you that you don't need an MBA to be successful and to grow. If you have an MBA, that's great. So do I. But it isn't a requirement to become an influential business leader within your organization. So foundational business knowledge. Imagine that you finally get an opportunity to, I'm sorry, there's a delay here. Imagine that you finally get an opportunity to present to your board of directors as a chief information security officer. Now imagine after your grand presentation around vulnerabilities and threats and incidents and KPIs and KRIs, that you start getting peppered with questions and you fumble around a little bit for answers. Now imagine after a few minutes that the chair of the audit committee speaks up and asks you to explain to them in your own words how the organization actually makes money. Now imagine a very awkward silence as again, you fumble around in your head for answers that you just don't have. At best, this completely discredits you as a business leader moving forward. At worst, this becomes a resume generating event. Don't be that cybersecurity leader, the one that runs a cybersecurity program in a vacuum without understanding how cybersecurity impacts the business. It's impossible to tie cybersecurity initiatives to business outcomes without fundamentally understanding how the organization makes money and its overall strategic goals. There are two immutable laws to business. First, organizations will generate and grow revenue. Second, organizations will optimize and reduce their costs. As cybersecurity leaders, it's imperative that we understand how our organizations adhere to these two laws. One tool that I use is the business model canvas. A business model describes the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. Meanwhile, the business model canvas offers a shared language for describing, visualizing, assessing, and changing business models. The canvas comprises 9 basic building blocks, including customer segments, value propositions, channels, customer relationships, revenue streams, key resources, key activities, key partnerships, and cost structure. Notice how I didn't say, what MDR, XDR platform you're using or who your SASE provider is. As a newer incoming security leader, I suggest building a canvas to solidify your understanding of the business. I would even produce the canvas as a formal deliverable of your systematic approach to learning in the first 90 days of your employment. Do this business analysis before you kind of get tainted by recent audit reports and risk assessment reports and pen test results, or even a systems inventory. Now, if you've been with a company for quite some time, this is a perfect opportunity to reset, because the knowledge that you'll gain by doing this mapping exercise will still benefit you moving forward. Business cases. Most of us attending today have probably seen or written a business case in one shape or another, and they're great. They provide a concise summary of business needs, right, to describe primary and direct and indirect benefits of the project you're proposing. They establish a timeline and a payback period. They evaluate alternatives. They're kind of a fundamental tool that we need to have in our tool set. I venture to say that many of us view sales as a necessary evil. But in reality, selling can be a great educator, and producing a business case is really an exercise in sales. I get it. We all get bombarded by salespeople daily, and we have vendor burnout. And please, no offense to the salespeople on this call, but the reality is CISOs have vendor burnout. That's no surprise. Another reality is, though, that we as security leaders can learn from great salespeople. The reality is that you must be an excellent salesperson to be an effective cybersecurity leader. At the heart of sales is empathy, or the ability to understand and share someone else's feelings. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Often when presenting a business case, though, the most relevant question you have to ask is, what emotion do I hope to evoke in each audience member or each listener? As much as I first believed that not presenting just straight facts was ultimately a failure of integrity, I was wrong. There's an opportunity cost for every investment. Remember that. So it's essential to have the ability to consistently empathize with your colleagues and articulate how cybersecurity projects impact things that are significant to them. I now know that presenting the same topic in different ways to varied audiences is essential. There are plenty of business case development templates out on the internet, and your company may even have a prescribed format. For that reason, I'd like to review one tool to improve your ability to communicate any business case effectively. And that tool is Cypam. And Scipam stands for situation, complication, implication, position, action, and benefit. So how does it work? It's actually pretty straightforward. Just write a sentence or two for each of these following items. Situation, state what you know about your listener's circumstances that is relevant to the discussion, such as the current state of the business, technology, industry, or the business's plans and organizational goals. The fact in the situation statement shouldn't be controversial or new to the audience. This is always the first sentence in your Cypam. Complication. Identify the critical issues, such as the changes, pressures, or demands on the business that are impacting the organization. Situation and creating problems or opportunities. Provide some of the most effective complication statements while also providing some thought-provoking information. Implication. Show the personal or business consequences of not acting on the problem or the opportunities described in the complication. The implication provides a logical transition and adds urgency to your recommendations. Position. State clearly and confidently your opinion about what needs to be done to solve your listener's problem. Again, adapting the message to your audience. Communicate this at a high level. This isn't the tactical action step that follows, but rather a strategic statement about your point of view on the issues at hand. Keep it short. The action step is where you get a little bit tactical and help your listener understand the role you want them to play or the questions you'd like them to answer or consider during the situation. Use action words like consider, discuss, explore, understand, imagine, which I believe I've used a couple of times during this talk. Benefit. Describe how your recommendations or position or action will address the listener's needs. State the results clearly and quantifiably if you can. The benefits you describe should differentiate you and be meaningful to your listener. So now we move on to communication and education. It's incumbent upon us to communicate and educate business leaders and board members. It's incumbent upon us to communicate in terms of business outcomes, usually as a function of risk in our case, and not in terms of threats, vulnerabilities, and Patch Tuesday. Now it's time to take your foundational business knowledge and transform common topics regarding cyber risks into an enterprise risk dialogue. Let's see if this works. There you go. Buzzword alert, digital transformation. But why? Digital transformation has exploded technology and cloud adoption across your organizations, leading to an increased attack surface. Heck, this past year and a half of the quick shift to work from home has poured fuel on that fire. However, protecting all data and all the workflows and all of the processes all of the time at the same time is impractical, especially considering the technology and threat landscape. And I'm sorry, the screen went black, so I'm just going to go to the next slide early. So again, protecting all the things all the time at the same time is impractical. So especially considering the changing threat landscape and the dynamic nature of organizational strategy. So the odds of doing so are exceedingly low, and the cost of doing so would be exceedingly high. So this goes to optimal resource allocation. So think about it. The odds of winning the Powerball grand prize jackpot is 1 in 292 million. Okay. The cost of a single Powerball ticket is $2. For that price, you may say, sure, I'll take a chance at it. Well, what if the cost per ticket were $200, $2,000, or $20,000? There's a better way forward. Cybersecurity risk should be integrated into the overall enterprise risk management program to address the challenge of security and privacy in today's global landscape. The goal of ERM is to understand an organization's tolerance for risk, categorize it, and quantify it. Many organizations do not have a formal ERM program, but someone is undoubtedly responsible for enterprise risk. This may be the general counsel or the chief financial officer, but whoever it is, make them your friend. They have likely wanted to form a formal ERM program. Volunteering to help them do so is a golden opportunity to ensure that cybersecurity's profile is elevated within the organization, and that cybersecurity risk is integrated into the overall enterprise risk management program. The framework to use is COSO, and I promise not to bore you even more to sleep by going through all of these 20 guiding principles in depth. But, COSO is a good place to start because executive leadership and boards of directors love best practices versus making it up as you go. So in 2017, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Creditworthy Commission, or COSO, released an update to the ERM framework. A large number of these updates address the fact that business risk has evolved to include cyber risk. So even COSO is recognizing this. Some benefits of using COSO to integrate cybersecurity risk into the ERM program include securing the investment of senior leadership, securing the involvement of senior leadership and the board in cybersecurity initiatives, better alignment of cybersecurity with those strategic business objectives, raising cybersecurity's profile within the organization, which ensures that enterprise risk is actually more accurate, creates a tailored risk approach or risk profile that reflects specific threats the organization and to the organization and the industry as a whole. And it provides increased visibility and transparency that drives better identification and treatment of risk. And maybe even most importantly, it provides a more cost-effective and cost-efficient treatment of risk. So the COSO ERM framework asserts, these 20 guiding principles that are grouped into 5 components of risk management. Those 5 components of risk management are governance and culture, strategy and objective setting, performance, review and revision, and information, communication, and reporting. And like I said, I'm not going to bore you to death by going into all 20 of these in detail, but I do want to focus on one of these guiding principles specifically, which is number 14 under performance, which is develops a portfolio view. So developing a portfolio view of risk. A portfolio view allows management and the board to consider the type, severity, and interdependency of risks and how they may affect performance. Using the portfolio view, the organization identifies severe risks at the organizational and business level. Business unit risk registers need to be aggregated and normalized and rolled up into the enterprise risk register to align enterprise risk. Then risks can be evaluated and prioritized across business units into an enterprise risk profile. I've leveraged COSO and in this guidance and broken this down into a 4-step process. The first step is ERM guidance, and this involves the risk direction from the top of the organization. Right? Your board and executive leadership teams, they consider the relative importance of external and internal factors alongside its strategy and business context. Those organizational leaders can use these factors to determine risk acceptance levels and risk tolerance and balance, and balance resources, resource allocations for risks, treatment across the organization. So again, determine risk acceptance levels and balance resource allocations for risk treatment across the organization. Operational leaders will then pass down this resulting guidance and, along with financial guidance and budgets to the business unit level. In step 2, cyber risk assessments are conducted at the business unit level. We're all familiar with doing cyber risk assessments. Understanding the guidance from step 1 allows cybersecurity teams to help the operational managers frame, assess, manage, and respond to, and to report cyber risks within the business unit and in alignment with organizational strategy. Security controls can then be selected for the desired cybersecurity risk treatment outcomes to ensure cyber risk is operating within the approved risk appetite and risk tolerance boundaries. In step 3, risk treatment and monitoring results are reported to organizational stakeholders. The risk determinations or decisions and statuses are conveyed through the enterprise risk register and adjusted as necessary. In step 4, the ERM team collects, aggregates, and normalizes risk register information. Remember, shocker and newsflash, cybersecurity isn't the only risk input that the organization needs to consider. They also need to consider market risk, financial risk, operational risk, and so on. This process, though, allows the ERM team to report an understanding of actual and potential risks from threats and systemic failures to enterprise information and technology, create a risk taxonomy that normalizes risk management across the organization, inform risk mitigation activities at the business unit level, and relate these to organizational strategy and budgetary guidance to prioritize and implement risk responses, produce enterprise level risk disclosures for required reporting and public filings and hearings. Corporate 10K filings require risk disclosures. Regulations such as HIPAA and CCPA have defined reporting requirements in the event of a data breach. We're hearing news right now coming out of DC that Cyspam wants mandatory reporting requirements across the board. Major security incidents, such as the ones that affected Equifax and its customers and the Colonial Pipeline incident, they've led to congressional subpoenas and testimonies. And then finally, adjustments made to risk priorities and risk appetites and budgets here are then iterated back into step 1. Now we go to leadership, and warning, we're about to get into some of the soft, squishy stuff that oftentimes we as cybersecurity professionals don't like to talk about. But I want to talk about emotional intelligence. We've all probably heard of it. But foundational to good leadership is a strong emotional intelligence, or EQ. Yes, EQ deals with feelings, and again, all of the soft, squishy topics that many of us avoid, right? Firewalls, network packets, SIM alerts, and the latest artificial intelligence silver bullet don't have feelings. However, people do. Leading and influencing people requires you to be emotionally aware of yourself and others. EQ is the foundation upon which we build these trusted relationships, forge partnerships, and engage in genuine conversations. Efforts to align employees, peers in the C-suite, and cybersecurity strategy require us to leverage these relationships. We need to inspire with compelling stories, and sometimes it's best to allow our audiences to reach their own conclusions. By doing so, people engage, allowing you to ultimately add meaning to your relationships. Whether speaking to the board of directors to secure a budget, or coaching an employee through a rough patch, EQ allows you to tailor the perfect message for a given scenario. Daniel Goleman, who popularized the emotional intelligence concept back in 1995, he breaks down EQs into these 5 domains. The first is knowing one's emotions. This deals with self-awareness. How can you navigate others' emotions and feelings if you can't navigate your own? Studies show that people who have a better handle on their feelings are more confident about the decisions they make and how to lead people to achieve that goal. Managing emotions builds on self-awareness by appropriately handling those feelings. Has your boss ever made you want to rage quit? Don't lie to yourself. We know the answer is yes, even with the best of bosses. But the ability to pull a Taylor Swift and shake it off allows you to kind of plow through those setbacks. Motivating oneself. Appropriately suppressing those feelings in the pursuit of a goal is critical for self-motivation. The ability to just go with the flow and have emotional self-control actually leads to greater productivity. Recognizing others' emotions. This is empathy, and we talked about this earlier. Empathy is the ability to understand other people's emotional composition and treat people according to their feelings, to the feelings that they're experiencing at the time. And then finally, handling relationships. Managing relationships is hard work. I mean, any of us who are married or who are with a partner know this. And managing those relationships and building your networks requires finding common ground to build rapport. Building rapport builds trust, and trust allows your audiences to be more receptive to your storytelling. And then I want to talk a little bit about leadership styles. There are many different leadership styles that have been analyzed by scholars over the years, probably over a dozen or so. But we'll talk a little bit about 3 leadership styles here. But the key takeaway is to understand what your leadership style is or what type of leadership style you want to strive towards. Transformational leadership is a relatively new approach to leadership where a leader inspires others to raise above their self-interest to benefit the entire organization. So kind of imagine Mr. Spock when he proclaims, logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, with Captain Kirk responding, or the one. And as an aside, kudos to Captain Kirk, William Shatner, for getting launched into space at 90 years old yesterday. That's like fantastic. Back to reality though. Transformational leaders encourage and inspire employees to innovate and create change that will help grow and shape the organization's future success. Servant leadership is often related to transformational leadership. And there are, many definitions of servant leadership out there, but I'm a huge Denver Broncos fan. And I like the simple one that Mark Schlereth, former Denver Broncos defensive lineman, articulated just on the radio during one of my morning drives to work, where he stated, true leadership is when you care about what happens to others more than caring about what happens to you. The primary difference between transformational leadership and servant leadership is the focus on the leader. The transformational leader directs their focus towards the organization, and his or her behavior builds follower commitment towards organizational objectives, while the servant leader's focus is on the follower. Adaptive leadership often focuses on change, but it can be applied to many challenges, including managing conflicts across business units, acquiring and integrating another company, or frankly, or being acquired. Working in cybersecurity means living and breathing through tough challenges and changes almost daily. Attackers are seemingly one step ahead of us as attackers, so we're constantly faced with difficult situations. The common definition of adaptive leadership is the practice of mobilizing people to tackle tough challenges and thrive. So one last story before we wrap it up here. I managed a rather large security and network operations center, or a SNOC, and I ran into some of these leadership challenges almost daily. During my tenure, the client announced that they would move the SNOC out of the state before the contract ended. The announcement obviously led to a lot of distress among the team, And it was my role as a leader to navigate this team through the transition. Most of the team members did not want to or could not relocate. However, we had to maintain operations through the transition. My role was to first deliver on the organization's mission, but priority 1A was to the individuals on my team. I was kind of baptized by fire in adaptive and servant leadership. To be successful, I had to be adept at many of the traits of servant leadership. I had to listen to the concerns of individuals regarding the uncertainty of their futures. I had to show empathy as every single individual of my 35-person team faced a unique challenge. I had to show healing in helping others and helping them tackle their unique challenges. There were many difficult conversations. And while my advice was always, hey, you have to do what's best for you and your family, when pressed, sometimes my advice would be, you should really be proactive and look for another opportunity if you don't want to relocate. But I also had to temper this advice with the persuasion of having the individual stay to help us through the transition. I had to convince people who did not want to relocate that if they wanted our SNOC to win more work, we cannot be known as the SNOC that failed to meet its responsibilities. I also had to do all of this while continuing the commitment of, to the growth of my people and training and maintaining the community that we've built. I did this knowing that in the back of my mind, I wasn't relocating and that I'd likely be leaving the organization when the right opportunity presented itself. But in other words, I didn't check out. The right opportunity did present itself, and I did leave the organization. But I left the SNOC in good hands as I was able to coach and mentor my deputy so that he could seamlessly take over if I did leave or get hit by a bus. In the end, there was a successful transition, a successful and smooth transition, along with the SNOC actually winning more work in the process. So while there was a reduction in staff through attrition, there were no mandatory layoffs or reductions in force. So just to wrap this all up, having a good governance structure and a foundational business knowledge gets you in the room. We all talk about having a seat at the table. That gets you in the room. Foundational business knowledge leads to the ability to communicate and educate further, and this keeps you in the room and at the table. And then finally, leadership helps you package it all up and package it all together for your given audience. So I want to thank everyone today for sticking around and listening and joining us from wherever you are in the world, whether it be very early on the West Coast in the United States or very late in the evening in Asia. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll be in the virtual hallway and you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Have a great day and evening.
Rock, thank you. That was jam-packed. So many salient points that we as leaders can take back with us tomorrow. We have a few questions that have come in for you. The first one is around the COSO framework. What is your best tip for finding an advocate or an ally on the board?
So finding an ally on the board. So it actually kind of depends on the type of access you have to the board, right? So, if you're reporting to the CIO or you're a peer to the CIO, leverage those existing relationships who got there before you to find kind of the right board member to kind of lean on to be your advocate. Most of us are not in the position to do an end around and start contacting board members directly. So leverage the relationships you have within the organization to find out who that appropriate board member would be.
Great point. We all don't have direct access to the board, but we know somebody that does, or we know somebody that knows somebody that does.
Exactly. And that goes back to building those relationships, building that rapport, building trust, building those relationships. And it's networking internally within your organization.
Precisely. We have another question for you, and it's really around the business and the knowledge within the business. Is that really the secret weapon? Is understanding the business and having business knowledge? Is that the CISO's secret weapon?
I believe so. I believe so. I firmly believe that you can't operate a cybersecurity program in a vacuum, as I mentioned. Right? It's easy to go in and say, okay, we've got to lay out, these, the CIS 20 controls, right? Where's my asset inventory? Where's my incident response plan? What are we doing for vulnerability and patch management? Right? It's easy to just, come in and just start hammering out those kind of tactical controls and just be focused, tunnel vision without having the broader vision of what's going on in the organization.
Thank you for that. You made a good point around the different leadership styles. In my experience, we as CISOs go through seasons where we have to emphasize one of those leadership styles over the other. But then there are some times when we just have to have a healthy balance of all three. What are your thoughts on how a CISO can take stock and take inventory and adjust to the type of style that they need at that point in time?
And that's where that emotional intelligence comes in, right? Sometimes you have to put your foot on the gas pedal, and other times you have to slam your foot on the brake, right? And that's dependent on what's going on in your environment. Just like, when you're on the freeway, you can't, have your foot on the gas pedal going 80 miles an hour when you're on the 405 in Los Angeles at 5 p.m., right? You just can't do it. So you have to have that situational awareness, and building that situational awareness requires that emotional intelligence of what's going on around you, within your team, and again within the organization. Right? Is the organization in a high growth mode, or as many organizations have been over the past year and a half, have they been in a, hey, let's sustain and save cash mode? Right. So it's having that understanding and situational awareness of what's going on around you.
Great point. Great point. I have one last question for you. You made the really, really, key anecdote around the fact that we have to speak the language of the business. The business doesn't have to speak our language. And I know you said you don't need an MBA, but do you have any suggestions on where someone can start to learn and equip themselves with the business acumen that they may not have had, through their technical career?
Yep. Well, someone I know may have written a book that's coming out in January talking about that. Um, but in all seriousness, though, I mean, just start picking up business books, right? Like the Personal MBA, and I forget the author's name offhand, is a great book to kind of equip you with, hey, how to read a financial statement, what's EBITDA, and why should you care? When those terms are being flown around by your leadership, you need to be able to pick up on key things of, are they focusing on top line revenue growth, or are they focusing on operating margins? And what does all that mean? Right. So just start picking up business books. That's actually what kind of whetted my appetite that made me decide to go get an MBA. But again, you don't need an MBA to start having that foundational business knowledge.
So in short, you don't need an MBA, just read a book from a guy that has an MBA. And if they have experience in security, even better.
Exactly. Thank you for that.
No problem. No
But
problem.
whether it's my book or like the Personal MBA book or other business books that are out there, they kind of distill take their experiences into kind of like the what matters, and packages them together. So instead of a 2-year $60,000 to $100,000 program, right, you can do some self-education.
Right on, man. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you for getting this day started off in a way that I knew only you could.